Imagine a peaceful little town in the countryside, a place where everyone knows each other and life moves slowly. The streets are calm, with picturesque houses and well-kept gardens. In the center of the town, there's a charming square with an old bandstand and a serene lake, where children often play and the elderly stroll in their leisurely afternoons. In this tranquil setting lived Clara, a 32-year-old woman, newly married and full of dreams. Clara was known for her kindness and welcoming smile. She had recently married Lucas, a hardworking and dedicated man from a traditional local family. They decided to move into an old house that had belonged to Lucas's family for generations. The house was an impressive mansion, with large windows and a spacious porch overlooking the garden. The walls were made of reddish bricks, partially covered by green vines that gave the place a rustic charm. There was a swing on the porch where Clara liked to spend her afternoons reading books and watching the peaceful neighborhood go by. Despite its beauty, the house had an air of mystery. The old town residents told stories about it, whispering that it held dark secrets. They said that many years ago, something terrible had happened there, but no one knew exactly what. Clara, however, never paid much attention to these stories. To her, it was just a place to build a new life with Lucas. On the first night in the house, Clara felt a strange sense of discomfort. The shadows on the walls seemed to move subtly, as if they were alive. The sound of the wind against the windows sounded like distant whispers. Lucas, always rational, said they were just impressions of an old house, full of stories and memories. Gradually, Clara began to explore the rooms of the house, discovering fascinating and scary details at the same time. The attic, in particular, caught her attention. It was a dusty place full of old things, with antique furniture covered in white sheets. One day, while organizing the attic, Clara found an old diary hidden inside a wooden box. The diary belonged to a woman named Isabella, who had lived in the house more than a century ago. Clara couldn't resist her curiosity and began to read the diary. The yellowed and worn pages told the story of Isabella, a young woman who had lived there in the past. Isabella described the house with a mix of love and fear, mentioning strange events that tormented her night after night. She talked about shadows that moved on their own, whispering voices, and a constant feeling of being watched. As Clara delved deeper into the diary, she began to wonder if the stories she had heard about the house could be true. Could the house really hold dark secrets? And if so, what kind of mysteries were hidden there? Clara knew she had to discover the truth, not only for her own peace of mind, but also to protect her new life with Lucas. With each page of the diary, Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The connection between her and Isabella seemed to grow stronger, as if Isabella's experiences were somehow repeating themselves in her own life. Determined to uncover what really happened in that house, Clara prepared to face the mysteries that awaited her, unaware that she was about to plunge into a world of terror that would change her life forever. Soon after moving in, Clara began to notice strange things. At first, they were just light noises during the night, like footsteps in the hallway. Lucas always said they were just sounds of the old house settling, but Clara felt there was something more. One night, Clara was alone in the house, sitting on the living room sofa reading a book, when she heard a soft sound coming from upstairs. It was the sound of light footsteps, as if someone were walking slowly down the hallway. She got up, hesitant, and began to climb the stairs, each step creaking under her feet. When she reached the top of the stairs, the noise had stopped and everything was silent. Clara looked around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Sighing, she went back to the living room, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. But as the days went by, the noises became more frequent and disturbing. Objects in the house began to move on their own. Clara found doors she knew she had left closed, open, and lights she was sure she had turned off, on. One afternoon, while cleaning the kitchen, Clara heard a noise behind her. Quickly turning around, she saw all the chairs at the table pulled back, as if someone had suddenly stood up. Her heart raced, and she ran to the phone to call Lucas, but before she could dial, the sound stopped. The chairs were back to normal. Trembling, she tried to forget what she had seen, but the feeling of being watched continued to haunt her. The events intensified when Clara found an old mirror in the attic. The mirror had an elaborate frame, worn by time. Determined to put it to good use, Clara cleaned the mirror and hung it on the hallway wall. But soon after hanging it, even stranger things began to happen. Clara would walk past the mirror and, out of the corner of her eye, see reflections that shouldn't be there. Shadowy figures, quick movements that disappeared when she looked directly at the mirror. One night, while sleeping, Clara was awakened by a low whisper. She opened her eyes and saw a shadow in the corner of the room. She was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. The shadow began to slowly approach, and Clara felt an intense cold sweep through her body. When the shadow was about to touch her face, it vanished. Clara woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. Lucas, beside her, continued to sleep deeply, unaware of what was happening. Clara's nightmares began to intensify. She dreamed of a woman, always the same, in an old dress with eyes full of sadness. The woman was trapped in the house, desperately trying to communicate with Clara. In one of these dreams, the woman took her to the attic, where she pointed to a wooden box hidden under the floorboards. Clara woke up gasping, feeling that she needed to find that box. The next day, Clara went up to the attic and began searching for the box from her dream. After hours of searching, she finally found it. Inside, there was an old diary, the same one she had found before, but now with pages that seemed freshly written. The words spoke of pain, fear, and a malevolent presence that inhabited the house. Clara knew she needed to discover more about the house's history and the woman from the diary. She felt that something terrible was about to happen, something she needed to prevent at all costs. The strange events were not just coincidences, but signs of something much darker. Determined to protect her new life and her husband, Clara prepared to face the mysteries and horrors that awaited her, unaware that she was about to plunge into a real nightmare that would change her life forever. Reading the diary, Clara discovered that Isabella was a young woman tormented by visions and nightmares. She believed there was something evil in the house, something that pursued her relentlessly. As Clara delved deeper into the diary, the events in the house began to intensify. Objects moved on their own, doors locked and unlocked without explanation, and Clara started having the same nightmares described by Isabella. Clara felt a chill as she read Isabella's diary. The words, written in shaky handwriting, spoke of a dark presence in the house, something that tormented her night after night. Isabella described hearing whispers, seeing moving shadows, and feeling a constant, oppressive presence. Each page Clara turned seemed to bring to light more disturbing details about Isabella's life and the horrors she faced. One night, Clara decided to investigate further. She waited until Lucas was asleep and, armed with a flashlight, returned to the attic. The place was even more frightening at night, with shadows dancing on the walls and the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks. Clara opened the diary again, now determined to find any clue that might explain what was happening. As she read, she found a passage where Isabella mentioned a secret basement in the house, a place she believed was the epicenter of the malevolent activities. Isabella talked about hearing muffled screams and the sound of chains coming from the basement, describing a paralyzing fear of going down there. Clara knew she needed to find this basement and discover what was hidden there. The next day, Clara began searching for the secret basement. She scoured the house from top to bottom, knocking on walls and floors, looking for any sign of a hidden entrance. It was in the kitchen, behind a pantry shelf, that she found a concealed door. Her heart raced. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to reveal a steep staircase descending into the depths of the house. Slowly descending, Clara felt an intense cold and a pungent smell of mold and decay. The flashlight trembled in her hands as it illuminated the way. When she reached the bottom, she found a dark, damp room filled with strange symbols drawn on the walls. In the center of the room was a stone table, covered with scratch marks and dark stains that Clara preferred not to investigate too closely. While exploring the room, Clara found an old, rusty chest. With difficulty, she managed to open the lid, revealing a collection of macabre items: black candles, bones, and an old, dusty book. The book was written in a language Clara couldn't understand, but the disturbing images on the pages made it clear that it involved dark rituals. Clara realized that the house had been the site of dark rituals conducted by a secret cult, which believed that sacrificing human lives would give them power over the spirit world. Isabella had discovered this and tried to warn the world, but she ended up being silenced by the malevolent force that inhabited the house. With a heavy heart and a growing sense of despair, Clara returned to Isabella's diary. The last pages were a desperate plea for help, a silent cry from someone who knew their time was running out. Isabella spoke of feeling the malevolent presence approaching, knowing that she would soon be consumed by it. Clara knew she couldn't let the same fate befall her. She needed to find a way to banish the malevolent entity and free the house from its influence. But to do so, she would have to face her greatest fears and uncover the true power of the darkness lurking in the shadows of the house. Determined, Clara decided she would confront the evil head-on. She took the ritual book and began studying it, searching for anything that might help her understand how to combat the entity. She knew the battle would be difficult and dangerous, but she was willing to do anything to protect her new life and free Isabella's tormented soul. Desperate, Clara decided to delve deeper into the house's history. She discovered that, in the 19th century, the house had been the site of dark rituals conducted by a secret cult. These rituals involved human sacrifices to invoke malevolent entities. One night, Clara followed a noise to the basement, where she found a door hidden behind a wooden panel. Opening the door, she encountered an abandoned ritual room with strange symbols on the walls and bones scattered across the floor. As Clara descended the stairs toward the basement, each step echoed with a hollow and threatening sound. The air was cold and damp, filled with a moldy and decaying smell that made her skin crawl. The flashlight in her hand trembled, casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by her own footsteps and rapid breathing. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, Clara stood before the door she had found hidden behind the wooden panel. It was a sturdy door, made of dark wood, adorned with intricate carvings of symbols she couldn't understand. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open, which creaked long and agonizingly. On the other side, she found a dark room, illuminated only by the faint light of the flashlight. The room was a nightmarish scene. The walls were covered with strange and disturbing symbols, painted with a dark, dried substance. In the center of the room was a stone table, stained with dried blood and surrounded by melted candles. Human bones were scattered on the floor, arranged in a ritualistic manner. Clara felt a wave of panic, but knew she couldn't turn back now. She needed to understand what was happening and how she could stop it. As she explored the room, Clara found a small altar, covered with a black cloth and engraved symbols. On the altar was an old, worn book, similar to the one she had found before but larger and more detailed. The pages were filled with inscriptions and diagrams, describing dark rituals and invocations of malevolent entities. Clara realized that this was the heart of the secret cult that had once inhabited the house. Suddenly, she felt an intense cold behind her and heard a whisper that seemed to come from every corner of the room at once. Turning quickly, she saw a shadowy figure materializing in the darkness. It was an indistinct, dark form surrounded by an aura of palpable evil. Clara felt her heart race and a deep fear take hold of her. The figure approached slowly, the whispers growing in intensity and filling the air with a sound that seemed to echo inside her own mind. Clara tried to step back, but her feet seemed glued to the floor. The figure drew closer, and Clara could feel the malevolent energy emanating from it. The presence was overwhelming, making the air around her feel heavy and difficult to breathe. Clara knew she was face to face with the evil Isabella had mentioned in the diary, the entity invoked by the cult's dark rituals. Desperate, Clara remembered the instructions in Isabella's diary on how to banish the entity. With tremendous effort, she forced herself to move and grab the ritual book from the altar. She frantically flipped through the pages, searching for the specific ritual Isabella had described. She found the passage, a banishment incantation that seemed to require more willpower and courage than she thought she possessed. With the shadowy figure almost within reach, Clara began to recite the words of the ritual, her voice trembling but determined. As she recited, she felt a growing energy within her. a force that seemed to fight against the malevolent presence. The entity hesitated, as if being repelled by Clara's words. The room began to shake, the candles extinguished suddenly, and a gust of cold wind blew through the room. Clara continued reciting, each word filling her with more courage. The shadowy figure began to fade, letting out a high-pitched scream that echoed off the basement walls. Finally, with one last effort, Clara shouted the final word of the ritual. The entity disappeared in a whirlwind of shadows, leaving the room in a deep and unsettling silence. Exhausted, Clara fell to her knees, feeling the adrenaline subside and the residual fear dissipate. She knew she had faced something terrible and prevailed, but she also knew the fight was far from over. She needed to understand more about the rituals and the cult to ensure the entity would not return. With the ritual book in hand, Clara vowed to do everything in her power to protect her home and her life from the evil that once inhabited it. Clara tried to flee but was stopped by an invisible force. She felt a malevolent presence approaching and then saw the shadowy figure of Isabella, now an entity corrupted by evil. Isabella revealed she was trapped there, forced to serve the entity the cult had summoned. With her heart pounding, Clara used her willpower and the faith she had to fight against the presence. She remembered her grandmother's words about how light always conquers darkness. Realizing she was held by an invisible force, Clara felt her despair grow. She tried to move, but it was as if invisible chains held her firmly in place. Suddenly, a cold mist began to form around her, and from it emerged the shadowy figure of Isabella. But this Isabella was not the tormented woman described in the diary. Now, she was a corrupted entity, with eyes black as night and a presence that exuded pure evil. "You shouldn't have come here," whispered Isabella, her voice echoing like a spectral lament. "I am trapped in this place, serving a force that should never have been summoned." Clara, trembling, looked directly into the entity's eyes, feeling a cold shiver run through her body. "What do you want from me?" she managed to ask, her voice almost failing. Isabella slowly approached, the mist around her moving like a living serpent. "The entity wants your spirit. It feeds on fear and despair. I was the first, but I will not be the last. You must fight, Clara. You must be stronger than I was." With those words, Isabella extended her hand, and Clara felt a wave of malevolent energy try to overwhelm her. It was as if a tide of darkness was trying to drown her inner light. Clara remembered her grandmother's words, who always said that the light within us is more powerful than any darkness we may face. She closed her eyes and began to pray, calling upon all the hope and faith she possessed. She felt a gentle warmth begin to emanate from her heart, growing and spreading throughout her body. The darkness around her seemed to hesitate, as if being repelled by this inner light. Clara opened her eyes, now filled with determination. "I won't let this happen," she said, her voice firm. "I will not be a prisoner of this evil." Isabella's figure recoiled slightly, and Clara seized the moment to reach for the ritual book she had found earlier. With renewed energy, she began to frantically flip through the pages, searching for a ritual that could free her from the malevolent presence once and for all. She found a banishment ritual, more complex and powerful than the one she had used before. It required specific items scattered around the basement. As she searched for each item, black candles, salt, and a silver dagger, she felt the increasing pressure of the entity trying to dissuade her. Objects around her began to move on their own. The walls vibrated with a sinister force, but Clara remained steadfast. She set up a protection circle with the salt and lit the candles around it. With the silver dagger, she lightly cut her palm, letting drops of blood fall into the center of the circle. She began to recite the words of the ritual, each syllable charged with power and determination. The entity tried to cross the salt circle but was violently repelled. As she recited, Isabella's figure began to contort, screaming in agony. The shadowy entity tried to resist, but Clara continued, the light in her heart burning with intensity. With a final scream, the entity was pulled into a vortex of darkness that opened in the center of the circle, disappearing completely. The silence that followed was profound and deafening. Clara fell to her knees, exhausted but relieved. Isabella's figure had disappeared, freed from her cursed servitude. Clara knew she had won a great battle, but she also knew the house still held many dark secrets. With a heavy heart, Clara left the basement, slowly climbing the stairs to the light of the upper floor. Upstairs, she found Lucas awake, worried and relieved to see her. Clara knew she would have to explain everything that had happened, but she felt that together they could face anything. Determined to protect her home and her life, Clara vowed that she would never let evil dominate the house again. The sun was beginning to rise, casting golden rays of light through the windows, and Clara felt, for the first time in a long while, a renewed sense of hope. With the house plunged into an unsettling silence, Clara knew the fight was not over. Sitting on the attic floor, she searched through Isabella's belongings until she found an old grimoire, hidden inside an old wooden chest. The book, covered in dust and cobwebs, emanated an energy that seemed to pulse in her hands. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she knew this was the last resort, the key to freeing the house from the malevolent entity. She spent hours studying the grimoire, reading about protection and banishment rituals that required precision and concentration. One specific ritual caught her attention, a final banishment powerful enough to end the entity once and for all. But it was a complex ritual, requiring meticulous preparations and unwavering courage. Clara called Lucas, who, despite his fear, promised to help her every step of the way. Together, they gathered the necessary items: white candles, sacred herbs, and an ancient amulet found among Isabella's belongings. They prepared the main room of the house, drawing a protection circle on the floor and lighting the candles around it. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the house itself awaited the culmination of events that had begun so long ago. "Are we doing the right thing, Clara?" Lucas asked, gripping her hand tightly. "We have to, Lucas. It's our only chance to end this and free Isabella," Clara replied, determination in her voice. At dusk, Clara began the ritual, reciting the ancient words with a firm and resolute voice. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She felt the entity's presence drawing near, an oppressive energy trying to break through the protection circle. But Clara did not let herself be intimidated. She continued the ritual, focusing on the inner light her grandmother always said was more powerful than any darkness. As she recited the words, Clara felt the entity coming closer. The air around them turned cold, and shadows began to move on the walls, forming sinister shapes. Clara heard a malevolent whisper that seemed to come from every corner of the room. "You cannot banish me," the voice whispered. "I am eternal." Clara clutched the amulet in her hands, feeling the entity's force trying to invade her mind. "You are not eternal," she replied firmly. "The light within me is stronger than your darkness." With those words, Clara continued the ritual, her voice unwavering and full of conviction. The oppressive presence seemed to falter, as if the entity could sense her determination. As the final words of the ritual echoed through the room, a blinding light burst forth from the protection circle, enveloping the entity in its glow. The entity let out a final, anguished scream before being pulled into the light, disappearing into the void. The room fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifted, and Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She knew the house was finally free from the malevolent force that had haunted it for so long. Exhausted but triumphant, Clara and Lucas embraced, feeling the weight of their ordeal finally lift. They knew there would still be challenges ahead, but with the darkness banished, they could face the future with renewed hope and strength. Together, they would protect their home and ensure that the light within them would always prevail over any darkness that might come their way. As Clara recited the words, she felt the entity drawing closer and closer. The air around them grew cold, and shadows began to move on the walls, forming sinister shapes. Clara heard a malevolent whisper that seemed to come from every corner of the room. "You cannot banish me," the voice whispered. "I am eternal." Clara clutched the amulet in her hands, feeling the entity's force trying to invade her mind. "You are not eternal," she replied firmly. "The light within me is stronger than your darkness." As she continued the ritual, the entity fully manifested, a shadowy and distorted figure advancing towards Clara. Lucas, seeing his wife in danger, grabbed one of the candles and threw it at the figure, which recoiled with a scream of rage. The distraction gave Clara the time she needed to recite the final part of the ritual. The shadowy figure began to tremble, its distorted forms seeming to disintegrate. With a final scream, the entity was sucked into a vortex of darkness that opened in the center of the circle, disappearing completely. The silence that followed was profound and deafening. Clara fell to her knees, exhausted but relieved. Isabella's figure appeared, no longer a shadowy entity but a serene and grateful young woman. Her eyes shone with a gentle light as she whispered words of thanks. "Thank you, Clara. You have freed me. I can finally rest in peace." With tears in her eyes, Clara watched Isabella slowly disappear, dissolving into a golden light that illuminated the room. She felt a deep peace and a connection with Isabella that she would never forget. She knew the young woman was finally free from the torment that had imprisoned her for so long. After everything, Clara and Lucas decided it was time to start anew. They sold the house and moved to a new town, seeking a fresh beginning away from the dark memories. However, Clara would always carry with her the lessons she had learned. The courage in the face of the unknown, the strength of inner light, and the certainty that evil can be faced and defeated, no matter how powerful it seems. The story of the house and the horrors they faced remained between them, a secret kept in the corners of their memories. Clara knew that some stories are best left in the past, but she also knew that courage and determination can transform even the darkest moments into opportunities for growth and renewal.